I started my consulting business, but when I started it, I didn't have like the vision to go full time.
Yeah.
I was like, I just need to make some money on the side.
Yeah.
And then it was November of 2020. It was my final year of my doctoral program. My program is practice-based, so I had a residency with an education organization, and my supervisor basically talked to me sideways. And I was like, oh, I'm no longer willing to risk my mental health and my energy and my sanity on an organization who is not created for Black women, like period.
Yeah.
Workplaces are not created for Black women unless it was founded and ran by a Black woman. Like, I'm no longer willing to roll the dice that like I'm gonna be safe at a place. So I know that the only place I can guarantee my safety is in my own business.
I'm not afraid to write my brand new story. And what changes find a way to me, I can keep it moving. I'm not afraid to celebrate my glory. And when challenges grace my path, I know I can face another day. Inside, I rise, daring to learn. With Fox After 40.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Fox After 40, where we focus on women's wellness from head to toe. And today, you guys, I have one of my very good friends here, Dr. Erica, who is an educator, former principal, and someone who can help you transition into a second career after 40. You don't have to be 40. But before we get into it, I would love for Dr. Erica to talk about her journey and how she's gotten here, and her history in leadership. I remember Dr. Erica did a presentation on stage about leadership, and it was really inspiring, and it made me realize how much I did not actually learn to lead. That I was very much a doer and scrappy and a founder, and that leadership is actually can be very tactical, and actually has education behind it and steps and training. But anyway, you really opened my eyes to how brilliant you were when I saw you present, and I was like, oh, okay, I gotta talk to Dr. Erica. I gotta make sure I, get to listen to her. She's also been to Harvard, you guys. And are you still a doctoral candidate?
No, girl. I'm officially, I'm officially a doctor. So I graduated in 2021.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
I'm calling you Dr. Erica.
Why, thank you. Yes.
Dr.
She's
Erica.
now a doctor now.
Yes. Okay. So can you please share how you got here, what your background was, and then, we're going to get into how that helps other people as well.
Sure, of course. So first off, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation because I think entrepreneurship can feel very scary. I'm sure you could probably relate as an entrepreneur. And I just love kind of demystifying the journey for folks, in particular, folks who are educators. So my background is in education. And so I started as a high school math teacher. Yes, I taught math. And I went on to become a principal of a middle school. And then in 2018, I left the principalship. I went back to school full time and got my doctorate at Harvard in education leadership. And then since 2021, when I graduated, I've been full time in my business.
Okay.
But I actually started my business in 2017 when I was a principal. So for people who are just like, well, can you run your business while you're still working full time? I was like, I was a principal. So the answer is yes. Like you can absolutely grow your business while you're working full time, because that's actually how I started my business. So I started my business coaching other school leaders, working for other school districts, providing training for principals. And then when the pandemic hit, I had lots of people who were asking me, well, how do I start an education consulting business too? And that was kind of the beginning of, what is now Seven Figure Educator, Wealthy Black Educator, our coaching programs where we help Black educators become millionaires through growing seven-figure education consulting businesses.
I love that. So in 2017, when you started coaching other leaders, what did that look like monetarily, tactically? Like, walk me through. So you're working as a principal. How are you? Because most people are afraid to even start the side hustle, right? Like that's one piece of it. We don't have to deeply get into the fear of that, but that's one piece of it. But then it's to put it into practice and then figuring out who your clients are and being able to discreetly sell to the clients without disrupting your daytime gig.
So one of the things that you mentioned that I think makes my experience really unique in how I approach entrepreneurship is I'm formally trained in the art of leadership. And so at 23 is actually when I did my very first leadership program. So there's a program called New Leaders where you basically are in a residency like a doctor studying to be a principal. And I did that at 23. I got my master's at 25, 26, and then my master's in instructional leadership. And then I went back to school in 2018 to get my doctorate in education leadership. So studied at Harvard, the art of leadership. And so I say that because to answer your question, I think about there's a framework called the 8 Stages of Change by a white guy named John Cotter. And the very first step of change that he names is a sense of urgency. And so when you're talking about, okay, so what did that look like for you, to start your business, or even in general for folks who are wanting to start a business, like you have to be urgent. And so if you're not urgent about wanting to change your reality, and urgency could look like something shifts in my family and I need more money. Urgency could look like I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired and I can no longer continue to accept my reality. Something has to change. For me, that sense of urgency was I was drastically underpaid, and I had a number of like rock bottom moments of just being broke, very frankly. And one of them being I was out at a restaurant. I was a principal. The check came. I gave my card. The waitress came back and my card had declined. And the waitress who had to tell me that my card declined was one of my teachers. And so that was like a number of financial rock bottoms where I'm like, I can't keep doing this. Like something has got to change. And my very first strategy was trying to budget, right? Because that's what everybody talks about. Like, don't buy the lattes, pack your lunch. And I tried to do that. And the reality is you cannot budget your way out of being underpaid. And so as a principal, I was getting paid after taxes a little less than $4,000 a month. Ooh. So, right. And so, like,
not with all that stress.
I had over 1,000 middle school kids, a staff of 115, and my take-home pay is around $4,000 a month. So I was like, something has got to change. I have got to make more money. And at the time, there were some shifts happening in my school, which also gave me a sense of urgency. So,
did you have your doctorate at this point?
No.
Okay.
I didn't.
Okay,
so I'm still a principal,
but you
right?
had a master's.
I had my master's.
This is crazy. Okay.
I did. Yes. And so here I am. I'm like, all right, I need to figure out how to make more money. There are a couple people that I knew who were consulting. One of them at the time was my boss, who I love and adore, and I just deeply respect her to this day. We had the type of relationship where I could go to her and say, hey, I know you're consulting. If you ever get to a point where you're at capacity and you can't take a contract, just keep me in mind. Less than 30 days later, she hit me up. She was like, I have this opportunity. It's yours if you want it. I'm like, of course, bet. Wow. And it was a day of PD on a Saturday for $1,600. Now, this was 7 years ago. My prices were trash. Everybody's prices are trash when you first start. But at that time, it would take me 2 weeks to make that as a principal.
And you said PD? PD,
professional development. So a day of training. So I'm getting ready to get paid in one day what I would typically make in 2 weeks. And so I'm like, oh, say less. Like, that's all I needed to know, was to know that money could move faster. And for me, that was like the leading domino to what is now I have a 7-figure business.
And can you, I know what professional development is because one of my best friends is a teacher. Mm-hmm. But can you explain to the audience what that is?
Yeah, so professional development, you can think of like training. So anytime at your job, whether, you might have had to go on site or off site and someone's sitting at the beginning of the room, or some people might have to do it virtually where they have online training. But that's a term that we use. I'm realizing in education we use it more. PD is what we call it, or professional development, the art of being developed professionally.
And is that what most of your clients are doing now that come through your program?
So that's one of 9 different service models that we teach folks. So professional development is one, and that's the one that we're most used to in education. Another one is coaching, right? That's another one that's a lot of people are familiar with, of one-on-one coaching. One that we're not as familiar with would be group coaching programs. And so that would be another service model. So PD is one of the most common service models, but I also think I think education is evolving in a lot of ways that we just need to be more innovative in service models, but it's one of 9 that we teach our clients.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Fox After 40 and want to get notified about the next episode when it drops, make sure to go to curlmix.com and sign up for our mailing list. We'll notify you whenever a new episode comes out. And what was the turning point for you? So you're doing PD, you made your first 1,600K day, and from this coaching session with these other teachers, and then you go back to being a principal.
Right.
And then you're like, how can I get more of this?
Right. So the turning point for me, and this actually happened before that first contract, and to make a very long story short, at the time I was a principal, and the school board was essentially making a decision to add 300 kids to my school the following year.
Wow. And
anybody who has led change management, they know that that's just not how you lead change. If anything, you have to, from a culture standpoint, so if you just even imagine, as a CEO, let's say you have, 100 people that work for you, and someone comes tomorrow and says, we're getting ready to give you 30 more people. Mm-hmm. And you're like, wait a minute. Do I get to talk to them? Do I get to interview anybody? That drastically is going to change culture to where you basically have to start over. And so for me, I was like, wait a minute, you're telling me I have to start over and my pay doesn't change? Because I had those conversations too. I was like, oh, no. Can I do this? Yes. Am I willing to do this? No. So for me, I was like, that was another sense of urgency that I had, because I knew at that moment I was going to leave my job. But I didn't, for the first time in my life, have a plan for what was next, because I loved being a principal, to where I was like, okay, I got a year to figure this ish out. So let me start consulting to A, make money, and B, hopefully this will help me figure out what was next. But also at the same time, I applied to my doctoral program, and that's what ended up becoming my next step.
Okay, so when you're in this doctoral program, are you still consulting on the side?
Yes.
And are you still doing PD, or is there something different that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So oftentimes what I think gets a lot of people tripped up, especially in the early stage of starting their business when they still have a 9-to-5, they're like, well, how am I supposed to deliver services when I have a 9-to-5? So when I was a principal, I built my service model around my life at the time. So for me, it was either doing things on the weekend, or I would take PTO days to go and deliver professional development. And so I think that's also a part of the unlearning that we have to go through, is because this could happen in other fields, but particularly in education, we don't like to take days off. And so you got folks walking around here 20, 30 days of PTO, and you're like, well, how am I supposed to make time? Take them days. That's how you make time. And so when I was a principal, that was kind of my strategy, was doing my work, my consulting work on the weekends, or taking PTO days. When I was in school full time, you don't have PTO days when you're a full-time doctoral student. So in addition to the weekends, I started doing virtual coaching. So I would have classes from 9 to 5, and then I would be coaching principals in the evening.
You're coaching principals.
Yes.
That's what I've been trying. Okay, I'm like trying to get to. Okay, so you got PD and you got coaching principals. Are they paying you out of pocket, or the school's paying you to coach them?
So they'd be paying me through their school's budget.
Oh, wow. How did they advocate for this, or did you advocate for this and then you told them this was an offering?
Yeah, so in the beginning, a lot of my clients were people who were already, 1 to 2 degrees removed in my network. So that might have been, people I did certain leadership programs with, or when I was doing these PDs, people who attended the PDs and they were like, I want more. Do you offer additional services? I was presenting at conferences, which is another great way to generate leads or generate potential clients, is I was presenting at conferences, and that's how people found out about me. And so there were a few different strategies that I was playing in the beginning in order to basically get people to know about me.
Yeah.
And then it's, once there was interest, having a conversation, and every single school has a budget. And so there are certain decisions that principals are empowered to make in terms of how they spend their money. And then every district has a budget. So a lot of people, I think they're, from an education consulting perspective, they're overwhelmed because they're thinking about trying to get a contract with the district. So if you think about Chicago, they're trying to get a contract with Chicago Public Schools, when you could also get a contract with the school down the street, because they have their own budget that they could be working with. So there's multiple entry points from a budget standpoint in a school district.
So I love all of this being taught in the context of education in school and PD and principles. But what if I am an accountant? I'm an attorney. Does this apply to me?
It does. So it's interesting. And this is where, I believe educators, we have superpowers that can translate in many different ways. And one of the things we would say in education is good teaching is good teaching. So it doesn't matter whether it's second grade, sixth grade, or high school chemistry classroom, like good teaching is good teaching. And I believe the same thing happens in business. Good business is good business. And so whether you're running an accounting firm, whether you're running an education consulting business, whether you're running a hair care company, like there are tried and true business practices. And of course, like take into consideration your context, but what it means to manage a P&L, like what it means to have an effective marketing campaign, like those things are sector agnostic, meaning it doesn't matter really what sector you're in because they're solid practices regardless of what you do.
When did you realize you were an expert enough to coach other people?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, first off, I'm a Virgo, so I'm very confident.
Not astrology. I'm a Virgo rising. I'm a what is it? I'm a Libra moon. What's the one in the middle? I'm an Aries center.
Girl, I don't know. I just know
not okay. You ain't that elevated. You ain't really there. Okay.
I know like my main one, and then I know one of the other ones is a Pisces.
Okay.
So sometimes I be in my feelings a little bit, even though I be acting like I ain't got feelings. But I say that to say is one of my potentially toxic traits is like, I know that I'm smart.
Okay.
Like
I concur. I agree with you.
I know that I'm smart. I know that I could run circles around most people intellectually. Now, do I walk in a room and you get that energy from me? No, but I know I'm smart. And I've known for a very long time that I'm smart. And I believe that, knowing is not good enough. You have to have results.
Yeah.
And so I have a track record of results as a leader from my time as a teacher. So fun fact, I was a finalist for First Year Teacher of the Year in my district many, many, many moons ago. So I worked in one of the largest school districts in the country and was a finalist for First Year Teacher of the Year. I had taught at that time geometry and algebra 2, and we had increased our scores from 20% to my kids were 80 and 90% proficient within our school. I, as a principal and as an assistant principal, as a school leader, our school went from being one of the most unsafe schools in the district to we were ranked in the top 1% in our state for student growth. So I knew what I was doing, and I knew that I had experience and results to be able to translate to other people, but I also understood the skill of coaching, the skill of people. People don't do things just because you tell them to do it. I learned that very early on in my career, that there's actually an art to coaching. So I think for me, when I knew I was an expert is I always know I'm going to make things happen. It's just like, I just need the results to show other people that I can make things happen too.
So, Dr. Erica, I have no doubt that you're everything that you said you are. But I know you got clients who don't feel the way that you feel. And maybe you see something in them. What do you say to someone who doesn't know if they have enough expertise to coach?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's most of the time, like for folks who have that type of perspective, like I have to remind them like of their receipts. Where I'd be like, didn't you like write a book? Like, didn't you like grow kids 2 to 3 years within a year's time? Like, weren't you the counselor of the year in your district? They're like, oh yeah. And I think that's a characteristic of overachieving or high achieving people, is because we're moving so quickly and we're achieving so quickly, we actually forgot like what we did. Like, and so I think part of the work is like really just slowing down, pausing, and to really go back and realize what are all the things that you've accomplished in your career? What are the impact that you've had? Quantify that impact. How many people have sat in your trainings? How many people have you been impacted by? How can you make it numeric? How have people grown as a result of interacting with you? And I think when people take the time to do that, they realize like, wait a minute, like I know not just something, like I know a lot of things and people can pay me to actually help improve whatever pain point that they're experiencing.
So the title of this episode is Second Career After 40, Get Paid for Your Expertise and Escape Your 9 to 5. How long or what timeline do you think, I know you said urgent, right? But truly, it wasn't quite that urgent because you had been working on this for a few years and then it was urgent in the transition, right? To be able to supplement that income.
Right.
Do you give people who come to you, your clients that sign up for your program, a timeline to say, like, if you're still working at your job, these are some of the steps you should take. It should take you 1 year or 2 years or whatever. Do this program while you're still a teacher. Like, what do you advise people?
Yeah, so I believe that making decisions around transitioning from your job is really personal. So I personally don't take a stance on whether or not you should leave your job and how long you should give yourself in terms of when you leave. And for people who are clear that they want to transition, how much time do you need in order to do it? It's up to you. And if I say there's two aspects to it. Depending on how risk tolerant you are, if you wanted to give yourself a runway, and you know, I think people who are less risk tolerant, they probably want to make their salary before they leave their job. And regardless of what their salary is, I believe that you can make that within 3 to 6 months. If you are really about that action. If you really everybody ain't about that action. Some people say they about that action, but as someone who, because to your point, like I started my consulting business, but when I started it, I didn't have like the vision to go full time.
Yeah.
I was like, I just need to make some money on the side.
Yeah.
And then it was November of 2020. It was my final year of my doctoral program. My program is practice-based, so I had a residency with an education organization, and my supervisor basically talked to me sideways. And I was like, oh, I'm no longer willing to risk my mental health and my energy and my sanity on an organization who is not created for Black women, like period.
Yeah.
Workplaces are not created for Black women unless it was founded and ran by a Black woman. Like I'm no longer willing to roll the dice that like I'm gonna be safe at a place. So I know that the only place I can guarantee my safety is in my own business. So that was November. I decided I'm going full time when I graduate. November, December, January, February, March, April. So 5 to 6 months later is when I defended. I had a $63K month, which at that time was the highest revenue month that I had ever had.
Wow.
So I'm like, if you about that action, then I'd say 3 to 6 months. And I'm one of those, because there are some business coaches who say, you know, stay at your job for as long as you can, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, not if it's killing you spiritually. And so, because there are some people who actually can't pour into their business because they are spiritually dead when they leave their job. So if you decide that actually you need to leave tomorrow and you believe in yourself more than you believe in the job that's killing you, I say leave tomorrow, right? Because I believe nobody should be sacrificing their mental health for a job that will replace you tomorrow. If you decide to leave, right? And if you about that action, you will make it happen. You won't lose your house. Your bills won't go unpaid. Like you will figure some ish out. And those are the best entrepreneurs.
If you've gotten any value from listening to Fox After 40, you learned a beauty tip, you've gotten advice, you shared the episode with a friend, please do us a favor and leave us a review on Spotify and Apple. It goes a very long way in helping us continue to build the podcast. For the people who are not about that action,
are they listening to this podcast?
What do they say? What are common phrases you hear come out of their mouths when they're not really about it? They think they want to escape their 9 to 5, but they're really not ready.
Right. It's excuses, and part of it, it's fear that's packaged as excuses. So, for example, people who place a lot of weight on what their boss, supervisor, or job might say. So they'll say, well, I'm afraid to go and get clients because of what my job might think, or I don't want to post on social media about my business because of what my coworkers, they follow me. And I'm like, well, would you feel that? First off, read your employment contract. Do you have a conflict of interest policy? Okay, you don't. Now, would you feel that way if you were driving for Uber? Would you feel that way if you was working at the mall? Mm-hmm. So why do you feel that way about this? It's a form of self-sabotage. And it's because you're afraid of what might actually happen if you go for it. Or people who say, well, I don't want to be too salesy. I'm like, okay. And I get it, because I recall me thinking that at a moment in my journey. But at the same time, I'm like, you don't want to make money then. So you're comfortable. where you're not urgent yet. And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. But when you are urgent, because let me tell you what people get urgent about. They get urgent about their kids. When their kids need to go on a field trip, when their kids need uniforms, when kids need to play in AAU, they get real urgent. So you're used to getting urgent about everybody else.
Or a date night, or you know what I mean? Oh, this man, this boo, whoever interested in me, I gotta.
Right? You're urgent about everybody else. And I think there's such a deeper conversation that it's okay, we ain't got to get into it. But I think we, particularly as Black women, have been conditioned and socialized in this society to feel tension when we get urgent about ourselves. Like we make it mean all these other things, like being selfish or being arrogant, or I feel guilty, or like all these things that come to this. When I believe that's actually oppression at work, because oppression will make taboo the very things that will set us free. So you feel guilty for going to get another client because you're not cooking, but getting another client is getting ready to create freedom for you and your family. Is cooking doing the same? So you choose, but that is a force and an energy that keeps the current system in play.
Yeah.
Of us feeling guilty about actually creating freedom for ourselves and our families.
That was so heavy, but I loved it. I remember reading a study, and they were basically measuring all the different ethnicities of who would give to the homeless when they would walk by. And the person who would give the most time and time again of all the ethnicities, male, female, whatever, Black women.
Black women are going to save us.
And the folks who, and I don't know if the homeless is the right term. That's just what I'm going to. But when I remember watching someone being interviewed, and they were like, "Oh, I know to ask Black women because they're more likely going to give."
You're right.
And I was just like, when I saw that, I was like, dang, like we really want to save the world. We love people.
Right.
But then I was also like, dang, do we get a chance to say no?
Right.
Because everybody's going to ask us.
Right.
Because they know we're going to come through.
Right. Right. And what does it look like to save yourself? Right. And I think that's what entrepreneurship will force you to answer for yourself. Because entrepreneurship, I believe, is an act of saving yourself. And it will push up against every nook and cranny of self-worth and limiting belief. Like it will pull all of that to the surface. And again, you get to choose. And there's some people where, for whatever reason, they're not ready to do that work.
Yeah. And
I think it's important to know that. And again, you get to choose. I believe there's privilege and choice.
Yeah, that's true. And we're not knocking 9-to-5s, y'all. So
No.
this is just for somebody who wants to escape the one that they have.
Because my mama needs a 9-to-5. My mama does not need to be an entrepreneur. She needs to be a 9-to-5.
And
Yes.
look, I got friends who work in corporate making $500,000 a year.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And they off it too.
Right.
So
Right.
I definitely don't have the better situation, but I will say I agree with you in that entrepreneurship has definitely developed me personally at a much faster rate than had I done otherwise.
Right.
So I agree with you there. Dr. Erica, this has been so valuable, and I think it's going to be really helpful for people who are thinking about leaving their jobs and wanting to turn their skill set into a career or a second career, especially after 40. You're like, I don't know if I want to keep teaching. I don't know if I want to keep doing law, whatever. Is there anything that you have that you want to leave the people with, that you want them to know?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is entrepreneurship is a consistent act of betting on yourself. And I think just given the conversation we were just having is like, if I'm going to bet on anybody, I'm A, going to bet on myself, and B, I'm going to bet on Black women. And I think that's also the narrative that, because I'm still mindset is not a destination, it's a journey.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, even though I've had my business for 7 years, even though I've crossed the 7-figure mark multiple times in my business within a year's time, like there is still mindset work that I have to do. And a part of what I have to remind myself of is, what have I actually already accomplished that like puts this into perspective? Like I can still do this.
Yeah.
Because for real, running a school of 1,000 middle school kids and teaching high schoolers. I was 21 years old when I was a teacher, and I taught seniors. So I had a couple students who were older than me. Running a business is easier. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying the hardest thing I've done in my life is stand in front of a group of kids who are depending on me to teach them.
Wow.
Is waking up, getting into a building of over 1,000 middle school kids who are depending on me and the 115 staff that I'm leading to deliver a quality education. That is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. So my business, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying is I've done harder things. And so even when I'm forced with something new or trying to figure out a P&L statement and all that, I've done hard things. I'm not new to that. So that's the thing that I just consistently remind myself of, and I offer up to the audience. I'm like, what would this world look like if Black women believed in themselves, right? And not saying that like we lack confidence because we don't, but I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough grace. We don't give ourselves enough credit. And what would this world look like if we actually owned all of our gifts and our superpower? I think it would be such a better place.
Dr. Erica, you're gonna make me angry because I just thought about when you said, you're responsible for those 1,000 kids and then the 115 staff. I thought about the web of connectivity and how like you're at the center of it and there's all these little legs and phalanges like spreading out from the center of you, and then those people going to affect another 10, 15, 20 people in their lives, and those people going to affect another and I was like, oh my God, you're impacting millions of people as a principal of a middle school, and you were not being compensated even fractionally for the impact that you were actually having.
Right.
And that is absolutely maddening. And then you think about, we send our kids to these schools.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the people who are there, they're there because they have to be, not because they want to be. And it's like, what kind of world would we live in if we made the teaching environment a place that teachers wanted to be?
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Well, and I think I'll also name that my dissertation was in the history of the role of the principal and the history of education. And it's not a coincidence that educators are underpaid, because education is traditionally a predominantly women's profession. And so
here we go.
And so it's once you see the system, you can't unsee.
Yeah.
And so like to your point, and I think oftentimes we're sold this narrative. It's like you either gotta have your purpose or get paid, when it's like, no, they can coexist.
Right.
And they may not be able to coexist in the system you're currently operating in, but you have the power to create your own system. And so I just think that everybody should have that opportunity. I think it's one thing to know and to choose, but then I think it's something completely different to not know that this even existed, because prior to me starting my business, I had no idea that education consulting existed. Had no idea. And in my head, if I wanted to make more money, I had to be a superintendent, which is why I went to go get my doctorate, because I thought I was going to be a superintendent. And then I realized, wait, there's a whole nother pathway that still centers impact, and it also centers my personal freedom. And when I get free, I'm going to set other people free. And I'm like, we need to be having more conversations about this.
Oh my gosh. Dr. Erica, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
This is so eye-opening. I just learned so much about education I had no idea about. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And you guys, thank you so much for tuning into Fox After 40. I'll see you guys on the next episode. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.
Do